Thanks to years of comic book panels, a gigantic cinematic universe with dozens of actors constantly being recasted to play the same characters, and merchandise galore, superheroes resonate with audience of all ages. Now, when it comes to the world of video games, there have been a lot of great games based off an assortment of comic book heroes, but there's also been even more mediocre or outright terrible games over the years. With the likes of Marvel Spider-Man and the Batman Arkham series, there is clearly a demand for top-tier quality interpretations of superhero properties within the gaming space. This video will be a list of 10 comic book characters that need a breakout video game. The majority of heroes mentioned on this list will most likely have already been featured in a game at some point or another, but the focus here is to give that specific character their Arkham Asylum, a great game worthy of their status. Characters with certified great games like Batman, Spider-Man, Guardians of the Galaxy, and TMNT will be left off this list, as will announced projects like Wonder Woman, Wolverine, and Suicide Squad. For each entry on the list, I will be explaining why I think the comic book property would lend itself well to a video game, as well as giving a vague elevator pitch to a potential project idea. The concept of playing as a superhero lends itself nicely to a big open world on a lot of games, but I also try to mix and match a variety of different other game genres and concepts depending on the hero. Without further ado, let's start with number 10. Starting off this list, we have the Merc with a Mouth, Deadpool. Deadpool has actually already been in a lot of games, both as part of an ensemble and solo, but lacks the definitive high-quality Deadpool experience. The 2013 solo outing was enjoyed by many, but was a bit divisive overall. I'm looking for certified greatness here, which Wade Wilson has yet to have in the gaming space. As far as what kind of game, you could go a lot of different routes with Deadpool, as long as the developers nail the tone. I personally would love to see a cel-shaded linear beat-em-up with Devil May Cry inspired combat system. I think a colorful cel-shaded art style would mix well with Deadpool's over-the-top violence and fourth wall breaking comedy. When it comes to the combat, Wilson's katana would serve as the perfect short-range weapon, complemented by his dual pistols at range. I think combat sections could be accompanied by platforming and puzzles. The closest example I could think of would have to be a mix between Hi-Fi Rush and the classic God of War games, but with Deadpool's twisted sense of humor and lots of cartoon gore. Story-wise, each level could be capped off with a boss fight against one of the many X-Men as he goes on to take each of them out, kind of like the storyline in the comics. Am I crazy, or does this not sound like fun? Let me know below. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we've ever had the privilege of playing as Commissioner Gordon in a game. Is Jim Gordon a superhero? Not really, but he is an interesting hero character in a fascinating city with all sorts of material to work with. I know there has been somewhat of an excessive amount of Batman absent Gotham material in recent years, but I think Commissioner Gordon is a strong enough character to carry his own game. Now, what kind of game would Commissioner Gordon star in? I think a blend of action horror and a more of a detective case-by-case setup would be awesome. Imagine Resident Evil 4 meets LA Noire. In theory, this could work in a semi-open world with sectioned off areas. Jim Gordon must solve individual cases throughout Gotham with an overarching narrative and villain working in the background. All of this occurring with constant tension within the force. Who can you trust? When it comes to gameplay, I think an over-the-shoulder third-person shooter would help players feel intimate and maybe even somewhat scared. Remember, I think leaning into some horror-like tension and anticipation would really sell Gordon as a brave hero who at the end of the day is still just a man. Do you think a Commissioner Gordon game could work? I think there's enough interesting source material to have some fun. Superman is probably the most high-profile comic book character to never receive a great game, and that's not for a lack of demand or trying. The concept of a great Superman game seems like a daunting task for any developer, especially when you take into consideration the game needs to feel open and free without feeling small. It needs to make you feel the limitless power of Superman while also having an interesting set of activities and enemies to fight. Much like Spider-Man, the name value alone of Superman could move some units if given to the right studio. I think a narrative-driven open-world title would be the best way to go, emphasizing Superman's traits and abilities. Metropolis would have to be a decent size to fly around, with the perception of speed being crucial to flying. I believe a structure similar to Rockstar's style of open-world games would be ideal for Superman, with a mainline story complemented with a variety of side missions and random encounters that focus more on helping the community over, say, murderous rampages. Of course, this title would have to be void of murder and theft, but a certain degree of environmental destruction could be really cool and immersive within battles. A younger Superman would leave the door open for both gameplay progression and narrative options. There's a few antagonists that could work well, with Lex Luthor making the most sense to me. If this was done right, does flying around in a big open world as Superman sound like a good idea to you? I feel that a Green Lantern game could be amazing if given the right resources. Unlike many of the other games on this list, I don't have a particular lantern in mind, but rather I think it would be interesting to create your own lantern. When I really think about it, the universe of the Lantern Corps lends itself beautifully to an RPG, specifically an open-ish galaxy one. The focus would be several smaller open-world planets within a single galaxy. Think of a middle ground between Starfield and God of War's realms, or almost any Star Wars game where there would have to be maybe a dozen planets, but each are decently sized, fully explorable, spherical maps. An open-ended, choose-your-adventure style of story like that of a Bethesda title could work here, but I would actually opt for more of an open-ended version of, say, something like Hogwarts Legacy, where there's a definitive main story with some extra room for an individual player choice. I think it would be important for space and planet traversal to be seamless from one location to the next. Easier said than done, of course. Combat would also need to feel varied and deep, with a good and meaningful selection of abilities that revolve around the concept of making up objects with the ring. Story-wise, a conflict with one of the other cores seems to be the most obvious, but for this elevator pitch, the gameplay elements are definitely the most important. I originally had Hawkeye on this list and could still make a solid argument to why he should remain here, but Black Widow has a lot of commercial and gameplay potential. I think Agent Romanoff could be a very strong lead in a game. Her blend of stealth and combat leads to a lot of fun gameplay concepts. I think an action linear title that emphasizes environmental stealth would be awesome. I'm thinking of a mashup between Metal Gear Solid and the Hitman games. Having Black Widow take on the role of a hit woman sounds like a lot of fun. Imagine her disguised in plain sight, taking out several targets just to make a quick getaway into a gritty combat encounter. Timeline, this would most likely have to take place before she develops any sort of relationship with other major Marvel characters, especially if she's actually killing dudes. But that doesn't mean there can't be a few cameos here and there. There are a few genres of games that Romanoff could work in, but I think this style of game would suit her character and abilities best. Right behind Spider-Man, Iron Man is arguably the face of Marvel after the crazy success of the MCU. With the right talent behind and in front of the camera, audiences have become aware of just how compelling of a character Tony Stark can be. Iron Man was one of the first heroes that came to mind when making this list. To date, there really hasn't been a good Iron Man game. It's surprising no one has given it a crack outside of some old movie tie-in junk. This is another title that seems best as a narrative-driven single-player open-world game, but with some interesting upgrades and combat mechanics. Iron Man is known for his constant suit refreshes and upgrades. Tony Stark upgrades his suit more often than even an annualized smartphone release. I think expanding on this trait could lead to all sorts of unique and interesting upgrades. Let the player make their own Iron Man suit with appearance and stats on the table. Even better, let the player build their own garage of custom suits with unique benefits. To me, this would be absolutely the main selling point of the game, but also important would be nailing the feeling of combat and movement. If it was up to me, I would want a movement and combat system that blends elements from Anthem and, funny enough, Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi series. If any of you watching are familiar with the Tenkaichi series, you know how smooth and fast-paced combat and traversal mix together in aerial combat. I don't really have a strong opinion on the story of this game, but believe a game that centers around a customizable upgrade system and three-dimensional combat would definitely leave a mark. After playing Gotham Knights, one of my main takeaways was how if this formula was tweaked, how perfect it would be for a Teen Titans game. Gotham Knights specifically is a bit of a mixed bag, but a team-centric story with a good mix of characters could go a long way. Due to the original animated show as well as the Go spin-off, the Teen Titans brand is fairly strong across several generations of gamers. I believe Gotham Knights' foundation of having several playable characters being grounded by a home base translates well to the universe of Teen Titans, with most of that game's issues manifesting in the execution. I also think utilizing Jump City as an explorable open world with several missions also occurring within linear interior locations would be great. Think of how Marvel Spider-Man approached level design. Gotham Knights co-op would also be a welcome addition. Unlike Gotham Knight, I believe there would also be a mix of team-required missions so you feel that much needed sense of teamwork, whether assisted by another human or just an AI. There could be a main storyline where the team is trying to figure out some sort of mystery with subplots of unique stories for each of the individual characters. Between Robin, Starfire, Cyborg, Raven, and Beast Boy, developers would have to juggle a lot when it comes to traversal and combat, but I think if they're able to nail each of those crucial differences, this game could really succeed. Like many Marvel properties, Black Panther is as popular as he's ever been thanks to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I believe there's a strong desire from many fans for King T'Challa to receive his true coronation in the video game space. In my opinion, Black Panther's skill set and abilities are another example of a character who would shine best in the open world setting. For a Black Panther game, the setting is probably just as important as the man underneath the mask. A fully realized Wakanda could lead to all sorts of environmental storytelling. In this made-up Black Panther game, he would be just as much of a part of Wakanda as Peter Parker is to New York. So what I mean is Spider-Man's abilities revolve around being in New York, with his ability to crawl up buildings and swing on webs fitting perfectly with that setting. Imagine a Wakanda that has Black Panther swinging through jungle branches, running through fields, and climbing up the sides of mountains, Breath of the Wild style. T'Challa's super strength is ideal for beating up and juggling multiple enemies at the same time during story missions or even random encounters. In all honesty, I'm not the most familiar with Black Panther's source material, but with my superficial knowledge, I think a story that revolves around Kraven the Hunter as the main antagonist could be a fun dynamic, especially if this game takes place within the Insomniac verse. John Jones, the Martian Manhunter, is easily the least popular pick I have on this list within the mainstream, but I can't help but feel that if others were to be more exposed to him, they'd fall in love with him as a character and potentially enjoy him in a starring role for a game. Aliens coming to Earth is always in style and a fascinating concept to cover. What kind of humanity does a being not from this planet have? Especially one that hasn't assimilated to Earth's culture like Superman. When it comes to the game genre, I'm thinking of a Metroidvania, somewhat akin to Batman Arkham Asylum. John Jones has a lot of handy powers that could work perfectly for an action stealth Metroidvania. Some of the obvious must-have abilities are telepathy, supervision, phasing through objects, and shape-shifting. Basically, he is perfect for a superhero game. I think the more narrow approach of an Arkham Asylum-style Metroidvania would help show off the Martian's wide array of abilities better than a full-fledged open world. Narratively speaking, I've come up with the idea of John Jones crashing onto Earth in the somewhat distant past, going into a hibernation-like state, only to wake up years later in a government lab that has been fully crafted to house and contain him. The main goal is for John to escape and find a way home. Between John's desire to avoid conflict and make it home undetected, he is forced to be as strategic as possible in his decision-making, as well as taking into consideration the fact that the government's been studying him with certain defenses in place, such as impassable objects and fire. I'm not claiming this to be the best idea ever, so don't hesitate to speculate of a better concept, but this is just something I came up with. So this last entry is a bit of a cheat, but I couldn't help but include it, and that is Batman Beyond. Bruce Wayne's Batman has had plenty of time under the sun, or I guess more appropriately the shadows, but Terry McGinnis's Batman could work on so many levels. Honestly, just using the same formula as the Arkham games, but with a very different protagonist and an unfamiliar version of Gotham, would feel fresh. I think the mix of new and familiar could grab a lot of gamers' attentions and wallets if marketed right. For truly compelling narrative and gameplay, I think it's crucial to take advantage of Terry's unique toolset to contrast against Bruce Wayne's Batman. Invisibility, flying, even maybe lie detecting and scanning with Bruce Wayne in your era is a must. If done right, this version of Batman could take advantage of many of the best qualities of the classic Batman storytelling, as well as certain elements of Spider-Man traversal. The setting of futuristic Gotham City would quickly take center stage here with its potentially unique blend and mixture of Gotham's classic look mixed with plenty of cyberpunk elements, all of this on current-gen hardware. If it was up to me, I would tell Rocksteady to cut their losses and just release Suicide Squad in whatever shape it's in, and immediately start working on a Batman Beyond game that throws away any remnants of any sort of live service garbage. Just real quick, I have a few honorable mentions that didn't quite make the list. The Flash, Doctor Strange, Storm, and Ant-Man all sound interesting to me as characters, but I had a hard time imagining a compelling game centered around them from a gameplay perspective. When it came to other characters like Spawn, Static Shock, Daredevil, and the Punisher, I struggled to come up with compelling concepts that haven't already been done. For example, I think Static Shock would be an awesome hero in a game, and I find him to be an interesting character. However, every time I would try to brainstorm what that game would look like, I kept coming up with a final product that was a little too similar to Infamous. Now, maybe I just lack creativity, but that's one reason why I left off Static as well as some of the other characters here. I'm sure if developers had the right talent, financial backing, and passion for a project, basically any superhero would be able to be executed well, but these are just some of the ones that came to mind first. But that's my list. Of course, there are a ton of comic book characters that would also lend themselves nicely to a video game given to the right studio, but what would your dream list be? This video was surprisingly demanding on me on a creative level, but was also a lot of fun to make. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. As always, I appreciate you for watching, and until next time, see ya!